Have you ever been in some sort of relationship with a fearful, avoidant attachment style and thought that everything was going exceptionally well, only to suddenly feel like the wool got pulled over your eyes or the rug got pulled out from underneath you because they suddenly pulled away really strongly and it seemingly came out of nowhere? Well, if this is something that you're experiencing, there may be one or two or even all three of these three hidden things that often a fearful avoidant will get pushed away over and will cause them to try to essentially push that person that they're in a relationship with back because they're trying to self protect. And a lot of times, fearful avoidants won't actually share these things with their partner or loved one in a relationship. They won't say much at all. And so they can be things that go unnoticed. So in today's video, we're going to cover these three things. And on top of that, we are going to talk about three core solutions for how to stop if you see yourself being pushed away by a fearful avoidant, how to sort of get things back on track and stop that process from taking place. If you are new here, hello and welcome. My name is Thais. I'm the founder of the Personal Development School, ran a very busy client-based practice for the better part of 10 years, and put daily content out here on YouTube all about the subconscious mind, healing attachment styles, and tips and tools on a daily basis for how to heal your relationships. Now, if you've ever been in this position where you felt like a fearful avoidant pushed you away very suddenly, it can be very painful and very difficult. In fact, it can be extremely confusing because fearful avoidants are usually showing up as if everything's perfectly fine. And because they don't really communicate their needs and they're not great, as a general rule, about being vulnerable to people that they're in relationships with, it may seem like everything's great and suddenly the pattern changes, seemingly literally out of nowhere. One of the first things that causes the fearful avoidant attachment style to do this is because they have betrayal core wounds. And these betrayal core wounds run very deep. Okay. These betrayal core wounds, the moment they see one of the four C's, we're going to call them, that's not adding up or that's not being available in the relationship, it can actually trigger this core wound of betrayal to get set off. So, what are those four C's? Well, one of the first things is consistency. Fearful avoidance see consistency is essentially this sign of somebody being there and being able to be trusted in a relationship dynamic. If somebody's very inconsistent, fearful avoidant may put up with that for a little while, but eventually that will often cause them to feel like they need to pull away altogether. The second C that plays a huge role is this sense of consideration. If a fearful avoidant doesn't feel like their feelings are being considered in a relationship, if somebody doesn't consider you, it's very hard to trust them. Now, in a normal situation, if somebody didn't feel like they were being considered, they would probably communicate that right away. Hey, what about my experience here? I feel like you're not taking me into consideration. But because fearful avoidants struggle to communicate their needs and to really be vulnerable, because they essentially think that that will make them seem weak or unlovable or maybe even like some sort of burden, what happens is they hold those feelings in until they essentially build up enough feelings of negativity towards a person that they feel like they're ready to leave the relationship. So that goes a very long way. Another huge thing that is important in a relationship dynamic with a fearful avoidant is not just those other C's that we talked about, not just the consistency, the consideration, but also the sense of context for things. If it feels like something changes all of a sudden and there's no context for why, fearful avoidants will often sort of assign their worst case scenario ideas to those kinds of dynamics. I'll give you an example of this. You may see that if you cancel plans on a fearful avoidant and you don't give context for why, like if you're like, hey, I'm canceling plans tonight, I can't make it, see you later, there's no context. But if you say to somebody, hey, I'm canceling plans tonight, I'm really feeling under the weather, I just really need a night to recharge, I'll talk to you soon. That context allows a fearful avoidant to feel like they can trust you. And the number four C, okay, under the first reason why a fearful avoidant may pull away all of a sudden is if there's a lack of congruency. Now, this is something that fearful avoidants are hyper attuned to. You may not even realize that you were incongruent. Maybe you told a story one way one day and then told the story slightly differently the next day, or said that you were one place one day and then your actions reflected something different later on. And it's not necessarily that somebody's lying when they're incongruent. It can be that they just shifted the story to tell another part of the story. It could be that they said how they felt at one point and they changed how they felt later on. But fearful avoidants tend to see this as a huge breach of trust when they notice incongruencies in situations, and it will often cause them to really put strong walls up and go into this self protection or self preservation mode, which obviously can be quite detrimental to a relationship if somebody's icing you out. So that's one of the first points for how those betrayal core wounds and those three C's can really disrupt a relationship with a fearful avoidant, causing them to leave all of a sudden. The second major point here is if their abandonment core wounds are touched. What do I mean by the abandonment core wounds? Well, fearful avoidants often have this deep subconscious assumption where they believe that people will abandon them. And so they often don't want to be vulnerable and share this with somebody because it already feels really raw for them. And fearful avoidants often assume, because of prior conditioning, that even if I do share and open up, my needs won't get met anyway. So why bother? So what happens is if they feel like somebody's pulling away or somebody's expressing interest in somebody else or somebody's not really in the relationship, sometimes the fearful avoidant will push somebody away before they get hurt first. And I want to be really clear about this. This isn't a fearful avoidant doing this like to have the upper hand or to play games or to keep their power. It's actually their subconscious coping mechanism or one of them to really just avoid heartache. Like the relationship to it isn't like, oh, I'm just going to get to you first. It's like, oh, no, I'm scared you're really going to hurt me. So I better stop that from happening as quickly as I can. And so these two dynamics here are really important. Now, there's a third really important dynamic that pushes fearful avoidance away. I'm going to tell you about that in just a moment. The video is not over. But I will say, if you are the loved one of a fearful avoidant and you want to get the relationship back on track, before I get to point three here, I actually have a course for you all about healing a relationship with a fearful avoidant in sort of getting back together stage. And it also includes parts about like how to know if that's even the right thing to do in a relationship, and key patterns to look for and conversations to have to really be able to address that. And if it is the right thing, how to really move through that relationship. You can check that course out fully for free, just for a limited time. I'll put the link down below. And then point number three is if a fearful avoidant feels overwhelmed. Okay. Fearful avoidants have a trapped core wound. And often, if things are moving too fast, they fear that they're going to be trapped. If things are moving too slow, they fear that they're going to be rejected. Fearful avoidants really operate by this like Goldilocks zone in relationships. They need that middle ground. They need to feel like you're there and you're committed and you're trustworthy, but that they can have their own individual sense of identity as well and get their own needs met and maintain their friendships and not be engulfed by a relationship. But oftentimes, if somebody moves too quickly and they're not aware of the pace that the fearful avoidant wants to move at, sometimes the fearful avoidant, because they don't know how to communicate as clearly a lot of the time, they will just feel trapped all of a sudden, triggered, and then push somebody away from that space of fearing that overwhelm or engulfment. And of course, that can be something that sabotages the relationships seemingly all of a sudden and can be very problematic. So, being mindful of these three things is super important. If you want to do a deeper dive into what to do next, you can check out that free course for a limited time down below. And that's it for today's video. If you have more questions about this, let me know in the comments down below. Please subscribe to this channel if you're enjoying this content, and I can't wait to see you in future videos.